Dr. Tierney who is a National Geographic Explorer and Research Associate at the California Academy of Sciences. Tierney has received her undergraduate biology degree from Brown University and doctorate from Duke University in zoology in 1998. Her research work addresses science communication to promote environmental understanding and stewardship. Tierney now serves on the board of the TED Brain Trust and Wild Screen Trust. She works as a research director, or worked as a research director at Sea Studios Foundation right here in Cannery Row for 10 years, from 1998 to 2008, and helped to create the multi-million-dollar TV documentary series Strange Days on Planet Earth and Shape of Life. She now produces films independently with recent projects including TED Films on topics of plankton, animal evolution, plastic pollution, and sharks. Tierney serves the Daily Explorer online and Animal Jam, reaching out to 70 million registered players in 120 countries and 5 languages. Tierney also studies giant ocean sunfishes with active research sites in Galapagos and Bali, and runs the Adopt a Sunfish project. Wouldn't you love to adopt a sunfish? Her additional research work includes The Blue Room, which studies the effects of nature imagery on incarcerated populations, exploring how human brain responds to environmental campaign imagery. The Blue Room was named one of the Time magazine's top innovations or inventions of 2014. Tierney's talk today will address science communication outreach strategies.
So, as scientists, we're constantly running meticulous experiments. We're developing hypotheses, testing them, revising them, putting them up towards peer review, and publishing them. But no matter how supported our facts are and how much evidence we gather, often we put those facts out there and they're not listened to. No matter how well substantiated climate change is, it's met with a filter with public audiences. So this, of course, we're to paraphrase Dan Kahan from the Yale's Cultural Cognition Project, which is a great project worth checking out after this. He says, never have human societies known so much about mitigating the dangers we face, but agreed so little about what we collectively know. Instead we have so much evidence and so much data, but instead we're awash with climate change naysayers, anti-vaxxers still equating autism with vaccinations, gun owners saying owning a gun makes you safer, contrary to all existing evidence. So why is this? Why this, when the facts are out there, why are they not received sometimes? Well, part of that may be that we are, and it also leads to some nice apparel that you can get on a t-shirt now, that we are emotional beings. At our core, we are emotional beings, emotional tribal beings, and we make our decisions through an emotional basis. And science, Antonio Damasio has a great book that talks about how emotion really drives our intellect, and how emotion plays so much larger a part than we'd like our conscious, rational minds to believe. This emotional part of our decision-making capacity is actually becoming much more apparent in the way in which we receive our news. So how many of you, I'm just going to, with a show of hands, how many of you have Facebook accounts? Okay, a lot of you. How many do you read the news on your Facebook account? Yeah. Well, so you're a little bit on an older audience. Most of the audiences I have, it's pretty much a sea of hands, and that's about 2 billion people on this planet also have Facebook accounts. And so that ubiquitous news feed is not objective, but it's based on your past media diet. And so this is something that's gotten quite a lot of press in that the news feeds that are coming in through our social media networks are based on our own likings. That, of course, will assure that you spend longer time, put more of your eyes, stay on the Facebook page longer, which then exposes you to ads that are then supporting these industries. It's working for Facebook. I mean, they have upwards of 20 billion in revenue. So it's a good strategy, but unfortunately it does end up siloing our various groups into our echo chambers of our own beliefs. And that can be problematic. There's a really interesting project that the Wall Street Journal put out called the Red Feed, Blue Feed. And if you don't, it's worth checking out. You type in the same keyword, and depending on whether you are a liberal-leaning or a conservative, you will get completely different Facebook feeds. And the same holds true. Of course, this is something called confirmation bias. The more we hear something that supports our view, the more likely we are to believe it. And the less likely we are to actually have any sort of skepticism towards it and to do our own sleuthing. The same holds true if you do any searches on Google. If you're not searching incognito or you're not searching through your own Google account, or you're clearing your cookies all the time, if you're not doing that, then you're being tracked, and a lot of metadata on your past peregrinations through the web have been noted, and Google will give you back sites that they think you're most interested in as a service to you. So the search what you type in for your search is going to be, if you're a liberal environmentalist, what you type in, the same keyword, you're going to get back a very different search result than your right-wing uncle. Typing in the same word, absolutely. So try this, go find your right-wing uncle, and try typing in something like Trump and see what comes up, or climate change. You will get back different search results. So Google is not giving you an objective view of the world. So that's just something to bear in mind to have note of. Now, this is I love this cartoon because it does. It's a great example of why of confirmation bias. You know, it's much easier to accept what your tribe is telling you than to go outside of your tribe and see something that's rather inconvenient, that doesn't gel with your cultural views. And so it's easier to go into that reassuring lie. And there's been some really interesting studies that the more we have our views supported, the more emotional we become, and emotional animals we are. We're more likely to believe things. It's this cycle, but then it's also physiologic, because when we get confirmation of something that we believe to be true, we get a little dopamine release. Our reward system is triggered. So physiologically, we may be our own worst enemy if we keep believing the same lie in our tribe. So our physiology gives us that little boost to keep the lie going. So that's something that we need to be aware of. And, you know, it feels good. It feels good to have those opinions. I love the Dilbert cartoon. I'm just going to walk you through it. You know, I like to have opinions, but not informed opinions. It takes so much work to get informed that it defeats the whole point of having an opinion in the first place. What exactly do you think is the point of having an opinion? Well, the point is it feels good. Got that dopamine. That's totally nuts. Oh, is it? Unless you have hard data to back that up. It was nothing but an uninformed opinion that felt good. You're starting to make sense. Your whole life is a lie. So, you know, I think it's a wonderful way that does allude to the dopamine release when you have an uninformed opinion that feels good to get out there. So, you know, rather, this is, you could be quite fearful of this, but I think this is good that we're seeing this now, because this poster just went up in my daughter's school, how to spot fake news. And this was something that absolutely was it didn't exist when I was growing up, but now our kids are being much more sophisticated in learning that these page rank algorithms in our social media feeds have this dark side, and that we have these silos, and we have this moral, this confirmation bias. And our kids are going to be that much more sophisticated and knowledgeable and intellectually skeptical as they have this additional information at their fingertips on how to check when someone's trying to pull the wool over your eyes. And of course, when Abraham Lincoln is there to tell you internet news. So we have these filters that we have to be cognizant of when we're trying to understand why the science isn't getting out there. But there's another filter that is even much more pervasive, that's in every one of us. And this is it's the very, very large filter between our conscious mind and our subconscious mind. We move through the world with all our senses. And interestingly, there's a number of books on this. Our subconscious mind is pulling in about 11 million bits per second. Huge amount of information. That's so much information that our brains have to filter that down into our consciousness to actually deal with it. And our conscious brain is actually working at a much smaller rate. So we have between 11 million bits per second coming in through the subconscious, and what we filter through that bottleneck into our conscious brain, 50 bits per second. It's a trickle. It's sort of like getting the whole, the double this discharge of the Salinas River at peak, and then trying to have it come out of our faucet in our house, a little trickle. There's a lot of processing that goes on, and that's why there's actually a half-second delay between when we get that sensory information in and then consciously can react to it. There's a lot of processing that goes on in that filtration. So, as a communicator and as a scientist, you think, oh, how can I get to that subconscious? How can I target that area? So our conscious mind, our conscious rational mind is what social get rid of that. Is what social psychologist Jonathan Haidt compares to a small rider, little Gumby up there, riding atop a giant elephant, which is our subconscious, emotional, immediate gratification, irrational, instinctual side. So I think it's time we acknowledge the elephant in the room and those elephants, and try to figure out how we can best message to those pachyderms, especially if we're trying to influence decision making and learning. And this is why I think it's so important that partnering with the arts can help push through some of these entrenched filters, and it can reach out to people who might not otherwise have much of an interest in learning about scientific discoveries, and it can reach those deep leverage points to possibly upturn some of our entrenched viewpoints. Tolstoy, in his book What is Art, has an interesting quote saying, "The business of art is to make I'm paraphrasing it. The business of art is to make understood and felt that which might be otherwise inaccessible and incomprehensible. And for many, science is inaccessible and incomprehensible. And so art can help push through those filters and help message it." So in my work, I do research, but I also work with lots of different groups, from dance groups to oh my gosh, sorry, I think we have the sound really turned up on that, but that woke you up, didn't it? Sorry to you interpreters, you probably have headphones on. from dance troupes to filmmaking to working with school groups making murals, where we're actually creating artwork out of that. This is down at Carmel River School, where we took 16,000 plastic caps and turned them into this beautiful mural. And all the time as we're making it, we're talking about the perils of ocean plastic pollution, and they're using their hands and they're sculpting these things, and now it's a showpiece in the school and a constant place where kids can talk about different issues, and a conversation starter and motivator. And I also, and there's another, it was briefly mentioned in my intro, working with inmates in solitary confinement, putting nature imagery into prisons, and encouraging knowledge, encouraging learning about the natural world in this way, with artwork on prison walls, to encourage not only lowering stress and violence, but also encouraging learning about the natural world and connecting to a larger whole. And then a lot of work I've done is in filmmaking. A lot of it here when C Studios was in operation, and then also in smaller freelance work with TED Ed and NOAA. And I'm going to just spend the last part talking about some of the key points that I've learned in this kind of work, usually using filmmaking as my example, some of the key points in getting science across, key useful tools. And they include story, framing, and impact, measuring impact. It cannot be underscored how important story is when we're trying to convey our science or any of our discoveries. Story is crucial. A good story lights up the brain, in many different regions. It hits a bunch of our sensory pathways, and in so doing has a chance of connecting to other memories and being remembered in this way. And some really interesting work coming out of Princeton University, Uri Hassan's lab, has found that when he puts different, when he tells the same story to different people under functional magnetic resonance imagery, which measures blood flow to the brain, and it acts as a proxy for measuring activity levels in different parts of the brain, that brains light up in identical ways in a good story. So essentially, you have ignited the brain identically in your listeners with a story. You can touch them in that way. And it always helps to have a good narrator and a good story, start and finish. So I thought I'd just do a little teaser of one film that I worked on that had a rather how would you call it? An unexpected narrator. And I'll just do this quick little teaser.
How did I get here? Well, it's a stranger story than you might think. I came from a world of drifters, a place few humans have ever seen. The world of plankton. I came from a batch of 1 million eggs, and only a few of us survived. When I became a larva, I moved among other drifters. My fellow plankton came in all sizes, from tiny algae and bacteria to animals longer than a blue whale.
But that was using a sort of out-of-the-box narrator and drawing you into the story and imparting a lot of science that way and a message at the end. So also incredibly important is framing, how we contextualize the story that we're about to impart is incredibly important. And there's lots of different frames that you can choose from. A local frame, so you're putting everything in your local context and how that applies to the larger context. What's happening now, what's going to happen in the future, how promotion versus prevention. We're much more likely, we fear losing something we already have. We're much more resistant to losing something than to gaining something. That's another psychological principle to know. The fear frame, a super powerful frame that is invoked very often with Hollywood films that are always hawking the apocalypse, and the interconnectivity frame. Now we see with, many Hollywood films that depict the future, it's always dystopian with robots and zombies wanting to eat the brains of your children, like The Road or something. I mean, what kind of future is that? But it's drama, and it grabs your attention. The only thing is that we have to be quite judicious in our use of the fear frame, because then this can bring about emotional numbing. But it is a very powerful frame. Some interesting work, and I just got a grant to work with this group at Stanford, is looking at pro-social decision-making and what parts of the brain get activated with different environmental campaigning. And what's pretty interesting is this area of the brain, the anterior insula, which is where we register a lot of our negative emotions, is quite good at predicting whether or not someone is going to donate to an environmental cause. So the fear and disgust is very primal in us, and can be very powerful, but has to be used judiciously for fear of emotional numbing and overwhelm, and overwhelming your audience. But this is work that we'll be doing a lot more of, looking at different environmental campaigns and how we can look at how they play out in the brain, and what's going to be most predictive towards action and stewardship. So that's another realm of research. The interconnectivity frame is a very effective one, trying to put what's happening locally into a larger context. And this crystal ball here, right there, that marble, it's in grad school I was taught one of my best lessons by my graduate school advisor, Stephen Wainwright. When I would come to him with a question, I'd be like, I want to do my PhD on this, and he'd say, okay, the answer to that question is this. Now what's your question? And I'd say, oh, well, I guess if I knew that, then my question would be this. And he'd say, well, then the answer is this. Now what's your question? And he would do this until my question became very large and very very encompassing. And it was a really useful tool for me that I took through the rest of my life. It's, okay, we answer this one little part, but how does it then relate to everything bigger? And when it comes to climate change, what the most powerful mechanism for getting that message out there, we found, is you have your complicated climate change story, but then how does it relate to human? You're only going to reach so many people by saying the polar bears are getting slammed up in the Arctic. If you can relate it back to humans, and specifically human health, you're going to get a lot more traction on whatever climate change story you're telling, whether it's ocean acidification or anything. So if you look at Altmetric's data on what scientific papers get the most traction, look at what half of them are related to. A full half is what? It's medical and health sciences. So getting more of our science findings that relate to climate change and so showing how they relate to human health is critical. And incidentally, guess what the highest, the one paper last year that got the largest splash in the science media world, guess who wrote it? Barack Obama. Yes. Interesting context. Renewable energy. Yeah, he actually wrote 3 peer-reviewed papers during his presidency: healthcare, renewable energy, and crime reform, I think. And 19, I think he's written 13 peer-reviewed papers over the. Interesting juxtaposition with who's in power now. So anyway, we'll go there. So I do have a quick clip.
Emerging is this amazing picture of global connections where one part of the globe can be connected to another thousands of miles away.
The complexity and the large-scale linkages that are global, that are involved in this entire process, are mind-boggling to me. the warming of the Indian Ocean, and then how that affects the North Atlantic Oscillation. And that affects how the dust gets mobilized in the Sahara. Then you get a lot of dust in the air getting blown over to the Caribbean.
I think that what my foray into this area has really done for me is that it has really brought out to me how we are really just one globe. We are one world, and how events from one part of the world can impact so forcibly on you in a totally different part of the world. I've never visited Africa. It seems a million miles away, but in fact, changes there are affecting us here in the Caribbean.
So that woman is a physician in Jamaica, and she's found that respiratory rates, asthma rates, are on the rise, and is connected to this whole Earth planetary system. So that was one way in which we told that story, tying it to human health. And as a scientist, you want to be able to measure impact and then know what's working, what's not. There are great tools out there for doing that, like out of the Impact Field Guide and then the Media Impact Project. So ways for doing that, and lots of great groups joining science and art to message our critical state of the planet. And these are some terrific resources. See me afterwards. I can give you links to all of these groups that are doing this messaging. And just to end, our science knowledge is growing exponentially. Absolutely. And what we need now is for the knowledge of ourselves and how we understand science and how we understand each other to keep pace. It's nothing less than our survival at stake. So, thank you.